Okay, in case for people who are joining us right now, जो अभी हमें join कर रहे हैं, we are about to start. We are just waiting for some more people to join us, and Dr. Maria Hamid is with us, and I'll be starting this conversation, and I'm so looking forward to it because after so much reading, so much real hardcore policy stuff, I think we also need some light discussion and focused discussion, because this is such a huge subject, and obviously you can do a whole 3-hour session on this, but it's much better if we focus on 3 things, which I will introduce in about 30 seconds. We're just about to start now. We'll go live in 30 seconds. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. This is going to be a 45-minute session. We'll keep it crisp. We'll try not to be boring. Foreign policy and strategic issues tend to be very academic. No offense intended, of course, to Dr. Maria Hamid, who's a thoroughbred person from the academia, and of course, she's teaching at the National Defense University. And I'm very grateful, Dr. Maria. You had a very hectic day, I understand, and yet you joined us on a short notice. So thank you very much for doing that. And I'll be, of course, very kind to you. I will not pressure you into mental gymnastics. So I'll keep it really very focused on 3 points. We'll discuss 3 things. Obviously, our topic today is the Indian surgical strike against Pakistan at Balakot 3 years later. It happened, of course, on 27 February 2019. It's yesterday was the 3rd anniversary. And so we are basically, obviously right now the world is focused on the crisis in Ukraine. Coincidentally, a Russia expert is going to be with us in a few minutes, and I'm going to lightly touch on a link that Russia has to this essentially Pakistan and India incident that happened 3 years ago in the morning of 27 Feb 2019 over the skies of Kashmir. And so basically, what we're going to do is, or rather, let me begin by saying that yesterday was an important day in South Asia, but with 2 different narratives. So it was an important day, 27 Feb 2019, 3rd anniversary, but there were 2 very distinct narratives for why yesterday was important. In Pakistan, people were celebrating this day. In India, basically people, especially in government and in the military, wanted to forget it. And it's understandable why. Because Pakistan is 5 times smaller in size compared to India, both geographically and population-wise. And but despite that, on this day 3 years ago, Pakistan managed to shoot down 2 Indian Air Force jets and repel a surgical strike. And that surgical strike was supposed to put the Indian military in the league of major powers that can execute cross-border surgical strikes in pursuit of their interests and do it with impunity. So 3 years ago, India sent its fighter jets across the border into Pakistan with the hopes of executing a surgical strike and having those jets return back to their bases in India. And then India would then go to the world and usher itself in as a major power that can execute cross-border strikes with impunity and change the entire geostrategic calculus in the region. Obviously, this would have changed the whole dynamic of Pakistan-India relationship, the balance of power in the region, and of course, India's narrative on Kashmir. So for Pakistan, yesterday was a time to celebrate the fact that a smaller country, 5 times smaller than India, managed to pull this feat. For India, this was a major setback, obviously, a major setback for India's diplomacy, for India's narrative, narrative on Kashmir, narrative on Pakistan, and it was a setback for India's narrative and military posture with regards to Pakistan. So diplomacy, narrative, military. For India, in all these three areas, diplomacy, narrative, and military, what happened 3 years ago at Balakot on 27 Feb 2019 was no less than a major setback. And of course, I'm being very, I would say, academic and polite with my choice of words, because the words that are being used in Pakistan in celebration of 27 Feb are much more stronger in terms of how India was actually, the Indian narrative was defeated. And in fact, I even saw, and everybody saw on social media yesterday, many celebrating this day basically described it as a bloody nose. India went back with a bloody nose on 27 Feb, came in with these fighter jets to execute a cross-border strike, a surgical strike, and returned with a bloody nose. And before I introduce my guest, let me conclude by this quick recap, but a very short and brief one, because I would like my guest really to handle this one. So let me just say that the Indian Air Force fighter pilot Abhinandan Varthaman, the fighter pilot Abhinandan has become a symbol for India's failure to settle Kashmir conflict by using force against Kashmiris in Pakistan. Wing Commander Abhinandan was sent, and we'll show you his pictures, he was sent to bomb Pakistan on 27 Feb 2019. Pakistan Air Force shot down his plane, a MiG-21, Russian-made, and he was captured. The line "T is fantastic" entered history when the pilot appeared on Pakistani TV in a good shape, sipping tea and praising Pakistani officers for good treatment. Pakistan released him in a show of magnanimity by a smaller neighbor to a larger neighbor. And that day, on 27 Feb 2019, that day witnessed a dangerous dogfight over the skies of Kashmir between the fighter jets of these two nuclear-armed nations, Pakistan and India. And this dogfight ended in 2 Indian jets downed and claims by India of downing a Pakistani F-16 fighter jet. Obviously, those claims were proven wrong later by international media fact checkers. I mean, obviously Pakistan denied it, but nobody needs to take Pakistan's version on it. The international fact checkers in the international media verified the fact that the Indian claim of downing a Pakistani F-16 was not true. Now, in this roughly now 40-minute conversation with 2 distinguished experts, you are invited now, and you'll be listening to an interesting recap of what happened on that fateful day, and more importantly, how prolonging, and that's the purpose, this is the purpose of this conversation we're having today, how prolonging the conflict in Kashmir risks more military miscalculations, especially by a trigger-happy government in New Delhi under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And we will conclude by some discussion around the way forward, and that is for India to join Pakistan, and Kashmir is really in talks in this 75-year-old conflict. So I introduce my guest here, Dr. Maria Hamid, who is teaching at NDU, the National Defense University here in Pakistan. And she's an expert in information warfare, in perception management, and that's an area that she has focused on in her research. And I'm also joined here and glad to see Taimur Fahad Khan here as well, who is a Russia expert with the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, ISSI. In fact, both of these 2 institutions, the NDU and the ISSI, are 2 of the premier strategic research organizations here in the Pakistani capital. So thank you, Taimur, for being here. And obviously, Taimur being a Russia expert, I'm so I'm so enticed, and I'm barely resisting myself, Timur, from actually dragging you in to discuss the latest on Ukraine, where the whole international attention is. But I will stop myself, and we will discuss one aspect that involves Russia in this essentially Pakistan-India story of what happened 3 years ago, the surgical strike essentially that failed. And over to you, Maria. Just if you could quickly take us, and we'll begin with that, and I will come immediately then to Timur, who will tell us about the small but very significant and important Russian involvement, not as a state, but the name of Russia actually is dragged in a very, very indirect way. Really, it has nothing to do with the story, really. But the question that I'm going to pose to him that involves Russia as well is very interesting. So Timur, coming to you in a few minutes, but Maria, over to you. If you could just give us a recap of what really happened. Let's say, I won't say minute by minute, really, but a brief recap of how the whole dogfight unfolded on the morning of 27 Feb 2019.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. It is always a pleasure whenever you invite me over to your programs. Just a small correction, I am not yet a doctor, but on my way to be. But thank you for the humble introduction. It actually feels good to hear the doctor beforehand. Anyway, thank you. You did quite a brief recap of the actual Balakot incident, but I think since the audience who are listening right now, it's important for them to know the chain of events that actually led to this aerial combat between India and Pakistan in 2019. So I'll just give a brief rundown of a very brief recap of what actually led the events that led to this Balakot attack. So it was in the same year, same month, 14th of Feb, when there was an attack in Indian occupied Kashmir in Pulwama, where 44 Indian paramilitary troops, they died in an IED blast. So the blast, the responsibility was claimed by Jaish-e-Mohammed, which India has always alleged that Pakistan gives them safe harbor and it harbors the terrorists. The very next day, there was a harsh response from the Indian government, especially the Premier Modi, that the neighbor, not naming Pakistan, the neighbor should expect strong response against the Pulwama attacks. Since the investigations were in the very initial phases, there was no evidence, but as usual, India alleged Pakistan for the attack and for harboring the terrorists as well. The very same day, the status of most favored nation was also taken away by India, and a lot of harsh statements were, as you mentioned, to build a narrative against Pakistan, they were given. So it was also the brunt was faced by the Kashmiri people as well, complete lockdown. And the following days, Trump gave a statement, the UN gave a statement, Saudi Arabia and China gave a statement, because it was very obvious that both the states, they have been rivals since the inception of Pakistan. In any heightened tensions, they can lead in escalation, and any latent conflict can manifest in you never know when. So there were different statements given by both of the states. Pakistan, it tried telling India that we are ready to cooperate if we are given the evidences. DGISPR also gave a clear statement that talks are the solution, not the war. But also the army chief directly and indirectly warned India that we will not tolerate any kind of misadventure. So just to, you know, check the what reaction Pakistan would have on 26th of Feb, there was a jet that tried to intercept LOC in Muzaffarabad sector. And the very next day, the Balakot incident happened. Pakistan was the first state before India to report the incident that there has been an attack. The whole state, the whole country, we were waking up and it had already happened. And they claim that there's this hilltop there in Balakot, Jabba, where Jaish-e-Mohammed, they claim that there is a kind of an academy, and I'll try to keep it non-academics. There's an academy and a guest house where these terrorists, they're camping and Pakistan is harboring them. So they claimed that they killed a lot of important people from the ISI, from this terrorist organization. What you mentioned a while back, that it is a day that we commemorate and celebrate because we had Abhinandan and we strike them down. You know, that this is what happens in international relations when it comes to narrative building. India has always been very active in narrative building against Pakistan and for its own state. So they also kind of, you know, even it is considered internationally a failure on the part of the Indian military and the government. But still, if you look at the narrative that they're still building after 3 years, is that the operation was successful. They call it Operation Bandar, and they say that it was a successful operation. We were able to, you know, shot down so many. They even refute the claims by Atlantic Council, the satellite open imagery, the Australian Institute, every international institute and Western sources, and security people who from the security who had a rundown of the actual place where they claim that they killed a lot of terrorists that Pakistan was harboring. They refute every claim of that. Even now, if you look at videos from YouTube, if every layman specifically in India, they have this image in their mind that the operation was a success. But it's a shame on the part of India, their government, their military, that even after so many evidences and claims by the Western sources, by Pakistanis, they still celebrate this day and are continuing in building that narrative that India was successful. But what it all comes down to the point that we need to celebrate or remember such days so that we can build our own counter narrative, because that is what Pakistan needs to do. So going back to the point, they tried to they Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry, my screen completely blacked out. Okay, so this Balakot sector, they strike there, and then after. Why is the screen blacking out?
We can see you, Maria, and it's perfectly clear. And in fact, let me intervene here, and and you've given a good sum up of really what happened overnight, 26th and 27th of Feb. And I have a couple of follow-up questions I'm going to ask you about. And you referred to very aptly to how the Indian government and military basically shaped its own narrative of success over this, what essentially is a failed surgical strike. Obviously, the world, nobody actually buys the Indian version. That version is only available inside India. Internationally, 27 Feb 2019 is a day of infamy really for Indian military capabilities, and is well recorded internationally in very credible international media outlets as a day when Indian Air Force lost 2 fighter jets, and one of its fighter pilots was captured alive by Pakistan. So, and this is so very well documented. And I wish if we can show you, yeah, we can show you a screen grab of the Washington Post article on this matter. And if Shabir, if you can zoom this in, because this is a very long clip. Yeah, if you can show us the headline, actually, if you can zoom it in and just, yeah, and show us the headline. Did India actually shoot down a Pakistani F-16 in February? This just became a big deal. And basically this article in Washington Post destroyed the Indian version of really what happened. So I'm going to ask you about this, but let me just move, and Maria, and I'm going to come back to you now. But before that, Taimur, I know that I have to let you go, so I'm going to have you here for this one particular question, which involves, in a very, very indirect way, Russia, which is the fact that the Russian Air Force and the Russian military industry produced this fine piece of hardware called the MiG-21, which is a well-regarded fighter jet, among the best really internationally, very, very well known, tested in multiple theaters of operations in different circumstances, in different places all over the world. And basically it had a good track record. It does have a good track record. But on 27 Feb 2019, the Indian Air Force essentially mishandled this fine piece of Russian technology, the MiG-21. And since India itself sparked this debate about allegedly a Pakistani F-16 downing or shooting down two Indian Russian-made fighter jets, a lot of people thought, and obviously it was not true that Pakistan used the F-16s, and in fact, US officials indirectly through US media confirmed the fact that there were no F-16s used on the Pakistani side. But that's the Indian narrative, and India brought this the whole world to see this Indian narrative of American-made F-16s in Pakistani hands, allegedly, according to the Indians, fighting off or facing off with Russian technology, and the Indian Air Force and Indian pilots badly mishandling this technology, resulting in two of these jets being shot down by Pakistan Air Force. Obviously, I'm repeating myself again and again that this is not a test of how good Russian technology is, because MiG-21 is a fine piece of hardware. But it is also a fact, and a lot of people said this, that the Indian Air Force basically embarrassed the Russians by how they mishandled. It was so amateurish, the way they used this fine piece of Russian equipment and simply couldn't handle it. I mean, two jets lost within a few seconds or minutes, and inflicting no damage whatsoever on the other side, the Pakistani side. Really a very, very bad record, not only for the Indian Air Force, but indirectly also they give a bad name to the MiG-21s. What do you say, Taimur?
Well, sir, you are absolutely right. You know, they are right when they say that you have to choose your friends wisely, because if you don't choose them wisely, they might end up embarrassing you. And I think Russia made a mistake by choosing India as one of their friends. Although Indians have some very large, deep pockets from which they can buy Russian military hardware and also fulfill a big chunk of their military export market. But Indians are also responsible for putting a bad name to the Russian technology, which I might add is, has gathered a lot of renown for itself in the military industrial complex around the world. Now, as far as the Indian Air Force is concerned, it has had a very bad record as far as its handling of modern military hardware or aircrafts are concerned. The early versions of the MiG, MiG technology, they are known as flying coffins when they are being flown by the Indian pilots. which means that although the piece of technology is very much advanced and very state of the art, but it is the sheer incompetence of the Indian Air Force pilots that end up embarrassing the Russian technology, and they end up misusing it. And I'll also raise a flag as far as the Indian procurement of the S-400 state-of-the-art air defense system is concerned, that was recently procured from Russia at the cost of $4.5 to $5 billion. As per many experts, although the S-400 system has earned a very good name for itself in different theaters around the world, particularly the Middle East and as well as in the Belarusian theater, but I think the Indians, the procurement of S-400 system by Indians are going to, again, put a very bad name to this state-of-the-art technology as well, because this military equipment or this particular air defense system is incomplete without the rest of the complementary military hardware that is required in order to complement it or protect it, and also to ensure that this particular air defense system's longevity is ensured at the hands of Indians. So I would definitely reiterate the same point that it is because of the sheer incompetence of the Indian Air Force pilots that a good Russian military hardware is earning a bad name around the world. And this is exactly what happened 3 years ago with the Bison aircraft that was being used by Abhinandan.
Oh, that's great, Fahad. That's great insight. Now, since I have you here, and let me just tell everybody who's listening, Taimur is really has his finger on the pulse of Russian politics. So he's constantly following Russian affairs and is constantly speaking to Russian experts, and that's why I need to ask you, Taimur, this question. Can you tell me if, because I did not see, frankly, and I'm not an expert, and I didn't see, for example, any Russian expert comment publicly on the really bad performance that the Indian pilots gave using the MiG-21s. But I'm very much sure that Russian military experts actually very, very closely studied where the Indian Air Force went wrong using the MiG-21s. What can you tell us about this, Taimur? Okay, Taimur, I think you froze there. I can see your screen and it's frozen. So the moment you're back in, please give me a signal so that maybe I can repeat the question, because you're frozen completely. If you can hear me, maybe you could, and it happens, obviously there's an issue with the speed of the internet in Pakistan because of something to do with the fiber optic connection. But let him come back and I will interrupt you then and maybe ask him that one question, because it's really very interesting the way, and I love the way Taimur described it, the way MiG-21 is really known to have performed really very, very well in different theaters. But unfortunately, it had a bad luck. And I'm sure the Russians very, very closely studied where the Indian pilots went wrong. And obviously, the Russians do not want to, I can imagine, nobody told me this obviously, but I can imagine that the Russians would not want to embarrass their partners, their very, very old partners in India, by openly and publicly discussing where the Indian pilots went wrong, or even coming to the defense of the MiG-21 in the face of the impressions that the Indian government and military actually created by saying that Pakistani F-16s made by the US downed and shot down Russian-made Indian Air Force jets. So that's a question that I look forward to listening to an answer from Taimur when he's back, and I hope that he's back. And to the moderator, Mr. Shabir from YFK, if the moment he's in, please have him in, because he might disconnect and rejoin us using the link, the Zoom link. So Maria, we have two things to discuss really before we conclude this session. One is the F-16. The F-16 saga, and our moderator here, the host actually, not the moderator, I'm the moderator, the host here, from YFK, Mr. Shabir, just showed us the Washington Post screen grab. And Shabir, if you can, while you're talking, you can show it again when you get the chance. So Maria, let's come to the F-16 saga. So basically, India claimed that it shot down a Pakistani F-16, and it's actually a Pakistani F-16 that played the bigger role really in inflicting this damage to the Indian Air Force by downing 2 Indian jets. So the question here to you is, Pakistan of course denied this, and we can see it right now on the screen. The Washington Post story, did India shoot down a Pakistani F-16 in February? This just became a big deal. And then it says there are broader implications for India and the United States. And obviously, whoever is watching us, the audience, you can go and Google this article. You can simply write Pakistani F-16 Washington Post or Pakistani F-16 India Washington Post, and you'll get this article. Very, very fascinating article. So Maria, if you could just tell us what happened exactly. India claimed it was an F-16. It showed some parts. Pakistan said no. And then something happened. Luckily, it didn't come from Pakistan. It came from other sources that really, really embarrassed the Indian government. What happened?
Am I audible?
Perfectly well.
All right. Okay, so it was very clear by the Pakistani officials and the military that F-16 was not even used. So Indian Air Force or the military even trying to shut it down is out of the question. It was made completely clear that it was not used, JF-17 was used, and even the Western scholars, I would quote Christine Fair here because she is an advocate of Indian politics, Indian interests. Even she stunned the audience during a seminar when she said, I'm 100% sure that Indian Air Force did not.
Okay, it's a little frozen. And Maria, I'm sure you can hear me because your picture is frozen. And before you come back, let me just add here what Maria was referring to. A renowned American academic actually sat, I think it was an event in India, and it was an Indian audience in the hall, and she basically said, and she told her audience, you know how much the American academic was telling her audience how much I love and respect India, but I have to be very honest, you did not shoot down a Pakistani F-16. It is not true. And a couple of Indian people from the audience actually disagreed with her. And I can see you, Maria, you're back. I hope you can hear me.
I have a very poor internet connection today, so
actually you're very clear. You're audible, and your video is really very clear. So don't worry about it. So I was just telling the audience. Christine C. Fair, you were referring to, and I think she was in India that time, and she had an Indian audience before her, and she told them, you know, how much I respect and love India, but I have to be very honest. You did not shoot down an F-16. Please continue. Maria, if you're still there, you can resume, and we can see. Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, the question that needs to be asked is why would they claim that they did shot down an F-16? So that is the main question.
We lost you again, Maria. And I could see some pieces of what Indian government and military alleged or claimed to be pieces or remnants of the F-16. Taimur, are you there? Can you join us via audio and video? I can see your name, but I think you're not there. And if you're audible, you could rejoin and complete or continue the thought. Taimur, if complete the thought about the MiG-21 and to what extent the Russians would have studied the Indian Air Force failure and the downing of 2 Indian jets, one of them at least, Russian made, if not both actually. But Timur, I think he's also got a bad connection. And I think we lost Maria as well. So if Shabir, if we could come back to the pictures that you have, and if you could have them on the screen. And I would like to just continue the thought that Maria very, very eloquently described how an American academic, Christine Fair, was visiting India, and she was sitting with an Indian audience when somebody asked her to talk about how the Indian Air Force shot down a Pakistani F-16. And Christine Fair, the American academic, basically answered, and I remember I saw the clip, and I think it's available on YouTube. She basically replied by saying, you know how much you, the audience, and you, my Indian friends, you know how much I like India, and I keep visiting India, and I respect India, but the Indian Air Force did not shoot down the F-16, and you could see the shock in the Indian audience, because the Indian government and military was at that time, and continues to actually push a single narrative of India having shot down a Pakistani F-16, despite the fact that well-regarded and credible international media outlets like the Washington Post and others have actually published exhaustive reports fact-checking this Indian claim and proving that it is actually, in fact, incorrect. So, Maria, are you back by any chance? No. Okay, I think, and Timur also has a problem with the audio, and we're almost close to actually concluding our 45-minute session. And but I think, yeah, well, I'm just checking if we have any questions. No. So let me come to the conclusion. If Timur and Maria, if you both rejoin using your audio and video, please drop me a hint or say something so that I let you in and conclude the questions that you're trying to answer. But let me come to the conclusion by saying that what happened on 27 Feb 2019 with the failure of the Indian Air Force in executing a surgical strike inside Pakistan and coming back with what aptly Pakistan describes as a bloody nose, and then lying to the Indian public really with regards to what happened, and portraying what happened as a success, despite the fact that Pakistan actually captured an Indian Air Force pilot and honorably released him through a border checkpoint. Despite all of these things, we need not really stop a lot at what the Indian government narrative is. We need to actually come to what's beyond that, and that's our conclusion point. And this is where I will conclude that 27 Feb 2019 and Balakot incident basically proved one fact: that India, despite its huge size, 5 times larger than Pakistan, and despite everything, India cannot decisively deal with Pakistan or with Kashmiris militarily. And what more evidence to support this fact? And you can see a picture here of a Pakistani soldier and Pakistani Ministry of Foreign Affairs official, both escorting the Indian Air Force pilot Abhinandan through the Wagah border checkpoint back into India. And so basically this picture and what happened on 27 proves that India cannot decisively deal with Pakistan and with Kashmiris militarily, even when it sends its Air Force inside Pakistan to execute a surgical strike and fails, and actually comes back with a bloody nose, 2 jets down, 1 Air Force pilot captured. And the conclusion basically is that India should come to the table with Pakistan and negotiate a settlement for the 75-year-old conflict on Kashmir, according to United Nations Security Council resolution. I mean, that's the only way. I mean, if your military cannot settle the matter on the battlefield, it only makes sense that you settle it through talks and through negotiations and do it peacefully. With that, I would like to conclude, and I would like to thank Teimour. Teimour, I'm really sorry I couldn't get the answer to what Russian experts really had to say privately, maybe because they didn't speak publicly, but privately when they saw how badly the Indian Air Force pilots used their technology, the MiG-21 Bison, and resulted in this really huge embarrassment for the Indian military and for the Indian government. And with that, of course, Teimour, thank you very much. We'll have you again and we'll answer this. And I would like to thank Teimour Khan, who's a Russia expert at ISSI, the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. And also would like to thank Maria Hamid, who's a scholar in warfare and information operations and foreign policy at the National Defense University here in Islamabad. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.